By the way. Where's the cowbell? That is a new cowbell? Okay. We have a special bell that usually summons people really well. So I did lose my presentation, Susanna. You're working on it. All right, fantastic. So, all right. So we're back at the temple. Let's let people know over there in the hallway that it's time to come in. I wanted to remind you, just a quick, brief reminder, as I normally do, of what we've done in the past. How do we get to where we are today? So for a while we've been studying what the temple worship, what it must have looked like. We talked about the spirituality of the temple for a while, but now we've gotten to this new topic of what the temple worship looked like in the first century of the Common Era. And so today we will consider not just the places in the temple, but we also consider the beauties and the duties of those who served in those temples and the experiences of those who came to worship. I want you to realize how multifaceted of experience the temple was. I mean, it's this massive institution, and it takes so many people to run it. And the people who run it have one sort of experience, and the people who come and visit and participate have a different sort of experience. And it really depends a lot on who you are and what role you play, is what you get to see and how you get to experience the temple. So the Jerusalem temple was destroyed in the 70 CE. That's unfortunate, but it's a fact. So today we can only reconstruct the past from the records that we have, from the tiny remains that we have. And unfortunately, we have not been able to excavate the top of the Temple Mount. So a lot of things that we talk about are guesses and conjectures and things like that. We can't even measure things properly because the Temple Mount has not been touched or excavated since the temple has been destroyed. Not in recent time, not by scientists, not by people who keep records and document things. That has not been the case. So since those days, things have been let go. And obviously in the Middle Ages, all sorts of structures were built on top of it. When Muslims conquered Jerusalem, they built the big Dome of the Rock and the Mosque of Omar and the big synagogue, the big place of prayer for themselves. So that's all changed. So what we're going to do today is we're going to continue to imagine and try to put ourselves into the midst of the action. What was the temple really like in those days? That's what I'm hoping to do with you. So I'll show you a little bit of a big picture overview here of what the temple complex looked like in those days. This is an architectural drawing. It's pretty accurate, but we're still taking some guesses. Let's see if you can recognize the most important parts. Obviously, you see the plaza. The temple has been raised. Remember, the temple was built on top of the mountain, which of course was not flat. So what Herod the Great did is he built the walls around the mountains and then filled in those gaps by making the top plateau flat. He basically flattened the top of the mountain, not by chiseling away at the top, but by building up the sides. And so that allowed a large area to be available for the temple complex. I want you to think of the entire area of the temple, the circumference, sort of say, of the temple. I'll give you an example. You could see that if you look at the building itself, like the actual inner courts and the building of the temple, that's about a football field and a half in length, and it's about a football field in width. So think of that. And then look at the entire complex. Now you're talking about the size of about 10 football fields, right, or so. That's how big the temple plaza was. And the building that's on it, the building itself, is actually not that massive, but the entire area is quite large. And you can see that a lot is dedicated to the areas where people can gather. And during the holidays, there would be a lot of visitors. There would be many crowds that would gather there. And you could see that there's colonnades all around, and they allow people to rest and catch, some shade in the very, very sunny moments, because of course Jerusalem gets pretty warm, and so you will get hot, and people would need a place to conceal themselves from the heat. So it's a fairly large area. You could see there's a fortress on the very right top corner. It's called the Antonia Fortress. That's not part of the temple technically. It is a place where military forces were stationed that protected it, or sometimes the Romans would be stationed there who protected their own interests and things like that. So when you read about the Maccabean Wars and things like that, that's what people wanted to capture. They wanted to capture the fortress, because whoever controlled the fortress could control the top of the Temple Mount, essentially. And the Solomon's Colonnade on the left, this area that's with the roof, is just a tall area with columns, and then there's some buildings for storage, utilities, and things like that. It's called the Royal Portico, and the Solomon's Portico it was an area that was very big and open with large columns, and kind of a place where people can rest. People get together there. Sometimes people teaching in that area and speaking to one another. So multiple entrances and exits, and of course the most important part is the building itself, the courts, the two courts right there, which we will speak about, the courts and chambers of the temple a little bit more. So you can see a little bit more of a close-in look. If you notice, there's two main areas. One is called the women's court, and the other one is called the court of Israelites and the court of the priests. There's no divisions between the court of the priests and the court of Israelites. It's just that everyone kind of has their side to the court, but there's no division in there. But the court of the women, of course, is the main gathering area. That's where most people gathered. Most people did not go into the court of the priests. Only a few people actually went in there, unless you were a priest. If you were a worshiper, you could go in there. You had to be male to go in there, and you had to be bringing sacrifice, but not large crowds. And you can see the walls; they're walkable, so people got onto the walls. They walked the walls. They can actually see down of what was happening. So in the holidays, the place would be absolutely packed out, crowded. Of course, you could see the steps leading to the gates. There's multiple gates leading into the main building. You can see the kindling gate, the gate of firstlings, the water gate. These are all called under their functions. So different things came in out of those gates. And of course the priests, as they brought things in and out, that they used those gates. And believe it or not, there's also even in subterranean rooms underneath the temple there as well. So people could go down into the mountain. And there's quarters for the priests are also there, and places for the priests to live. So an impressive place. I told you that Herod the Great started the project, that he died before he was even able to see it completed, and then shortly after it was completed, a few years later, it was destroyed by the Romans. So it didn't stand in its full glory for super long. There was kind of an ongoing construction project, but even being incomplete, people were absolutely amazed by its beauty. Yes, Drake?
Well, one of the things I found fascinating about the temple, especially in the diaspora, after its destruction, is the fact that a lot of its architecture corresponded, and a lot of its observances corresponded with the prayers we do now.
Mm-hmm.
So, like the Tamid prayer, for example, it was there were two Tamid offerings, and then a cleaning of the altar, which correspond to Shachrit, Mincha, Ma'ariv.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the Kaddish prayers would be correspondent to entering into one gate to the next, if I'm not mistaken.
Possible.
Yeah.
It's a very, Kaddish is, the form of the Kaddish that we say is a very ancient form.
Yeah.
It might go back to the days of the temple, almost without changes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the entire structure of our worship, everything we do as far as our prayer services and Siddur, they follow everything that was happening in the temple. And you'll see that. I'll be going through this today, and it will make sense to you a little bit more. So let's see. I wanted to play this video for you guys. You have the sound over there. It's good. You ready to go? So that was done to scale, by the way. So you guys get to see, kind of take it in, because all of this is a reconstruction. You know, it's all done from descriptions that we have, and knowing the architecture, knowing little bits and pieces of kind of finding an arch that's halfway finished and realizing that this is how we would have continued, and then a lot of descriptions that we have from that time. So it's pretty amazing. Hopefully that video kind of gets you into the temple, like you can feel like you're almost there. Sometimes I'm a visual person, so it helps me a lot to imagine myself being there. So I wanted to talk today about the Kohanim, the priests. Everyone that served in the temple, everyone that came to the temple kind of had their own place to be and roles to play. And so what was it like for a priest? If you were one of the priests, what would your day in the life off be like? So while the priests served in the temple, they lived in designated chambers, which were all inside and around the Temple Mount. These chambers are all around the area, not always inside the temple. Maybe they could be right outside, but they were called lishkot. And so they had all these rooms, and these were buildings that were used for various functions, but they also served as the housing for the priests who were coming in. How do we know that? Again, we have some witnesses. Josephus is a good witness. When he wrote his book Polemos, called War, he described the destruction of the temple. He described and him being from a priestly family himself, Josephus could describe things accurately because he's actually been there, seen there, and been trained in most of those things. He was one of the people there, so he could describe it with precision. He can tell you what was where and how it happened. So in the book War, which he writes to Romans to really explain about, about this Jewish temple that was destroyed, in his book War, he goes sometimes into details. And he tells us, this is where things were, this is how it happened, this is how it worked. And that's how we can look back and recapture some of those details and know actually how it was back in those days. Because the Bible, it only tells us so much, right? We don't have so much detail there. So we have to have sources outside of that. Another source is Mishnah. There's multiple tractates in Mishnah that describe temple service and talk about all this. And so in the Mishnah, in the tractate Midot, for example, in that section, we're told right away that there were these houses, there were these chambers, these lishkot, that were used for the priests, and they functioned as living quarters for them. As the priests would come in to serve their week, they would stay in the area for the whole entire week. They're not going to go home. They're coming to the temple, they're going to stay there, they're going to live there, and they're going to serve, and they're going to get up early in the morning and work late into the night. So that was their job, that was their duty. So what was it like to be the priest in that time? I know it's hard for us to imagine, because again, this is a world that's very different from ours. But I'm going to try to draw some of these pictures out for you. Now, imagine it's about 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, and the days for the priests begins right around then. It begins in a chamber of the hewn stone. It's a special area where Great Sanhedrin would meet in the first century. And this is where the priests would come together and they would cast lots to determine their daily duties. They're going to have their job assignments given to them right there. And the Mishnah records that an officer or an overseer, he said to them, "Come, cast lots." And they would gather and they would cast lots. And whoever won, won. It was a very fair system, because you can imagine with some people being very influential and perhaps of great stature, that they would say, "Oh, I want to be the one who gets to deliver the lamb to the top of the ramp. I don't want to be the guy who does this, I want to be the guy who does that." So you can imagine that people would want certain jobs, or they would say, "I would want to be the one who gets to do incense in the temple." And that's not how it was. Those duties were assigned by lot. So that, in that sense, the lot system, it was fair. It was a distribution of labor. Nobody got to pick what they wanted. What fell is what fell to you. And I'll describe to you how that system worked. It's fascinating. But the lottery system basically was conducted in the dark with the lamps and torches. And imagine about 1,000 priests being available to serve that week. 1,000 priests. Now remember, this is a big complex, and priests don't get to just do one task. There's a lot of different tasks they get to do. And the most important jobs that those priests would get to do will be handed out by using those lots. So they would present themselves, and they would be ready to perform a sacred function. And some of them were priests in training. Some of them were not quite yet ready. So some of them will be going on ride-alongs or walk-alongs or something. They'll be standing there watching and learning, observing others. And some would be supervising priests. Some who perhaps have already passed their age of prime when they're not supposed to be doing heavy things. They can still supervise, they can still teach, they can still make sure that things are done properly, and if something is off, they can make sure that it's taken care of. So there's always supervisory functions also. So you would see various priests, at once, there's not going to be 1,000 priests necessarily working all at once. Some would basically have to be a standby priest, because what would happen if a priest become defiled? Another would have to take his place. What would happen if he got sick? Got dehydrated and got heat stroke? Somebody would have to step in for him. So there were always backups, actually. People don't realize this. Being a backup was also an important part, and you just stood there ready to take up that role if something happened.
Have you heard the old Hasidic legend of the Lamed Vavniks?
Lamed Vavniks. Now, that does sound familiar, but I don't remember where it goes.
I believe at the actual temple proper,
Okay.
on a given day, there were about like 36 different men who would go in, and they would go in a regiment of 36, and they would be relieved in a regiment of 36. And so that was the standard number.
Mm-hmm.
But according to Jewish legend, in every generation, there are 36 righteous people whose existence holds up the world before God, essentially. If there were only 35 or something,
Right.
then the world would come crashing down.
Right. We got to have at least 36.
You have to have at least, most Lamed Vavniks do not know that they're Lamed Vavniks.
Right.
And when one of them dies, another one is born.
Another one is born.
Yeah. So,
I like it. No, it's a beautiful tradition to think about it. So that makes sense because communal faith in Israel is all about community, and you realize you are not it. It's not about you, it's about others. And so imagine that there is this core community that is kind of holding it all together. And if they weren't there, everything essentially would fall apart. So there's that bare minimum. So the bare minimum that we usually have in the synagogue is a minyan, right? 10. So in order to have, we have to have 10 people in order to recite certain prayers and things like that. So as it was with rituals, they needed to have that quorum. And so that's an interesting story. Lamed Vavniks, that's good. So by the way, Lamed and Vav together make 35. So 36, yes, that's the idea. In Hebrew, letters are numbers. Okay, in case you didn't know. Okay. All right, cool. Let's keep going. So 5 a.m., they start casting lots. Can you imagine that? It's still dark. They got torches. They got lamps. They start picking which jobs will fall to whom. Now, the entire priesthood was divided into 24 divisions. There were 24 mishmerot, as they're called. They followed the system that King David established in 1 Chronicles 24. You can read, that's how far back it goes. The idea of 24 divisions of priestly families. They were essentially families. They were divided into these 24 groups. Each division or each order of the priests was subdivided into 6 families. So now you have 24 divisions, and each of the 24 is subdivided into 6. And each for one day, essentially, of the week, while the entire order served on Shabbat. I want you to realize, if I have 1,000 priests, if my order is 1,000 priests, that's my family. Okay, these are all my relatives, by the way. So, and out of those 1,000 people, it would have 6 groups. They'd be broken into groups. Now, on Sunday, this group will serve. On Monday, this group will serve. On Tuesday, this group will serve. And that way, all 6 groups would get to serve throughout each day of the week once. They would get their shot. Because remember, we're going to have a lottery for the jobs. And if you have to compete against 1,000 priests, of whether you get to handle the sacrifices or anything else, that's a big competition. That lottery ticket is also already not so attractive anymore, right? You're like, what are the chances it's going to fall to me? But no, you're not competing against 1,000. You're competing against just the people within your smaller group. So you're one of those 6 groups, and on your day, your group gets to cast lots. And if you get to pick to do that job, then that's your job. So on Shabbat, however, all the 6 groups would serve together. Because on Shabbat, they had to handle a lot more visitors. Because guess what? On Shabbat, Israelites don't work. That means they show up to the temple. And that means they bring their gifts, they bring their offerings, they bring their tithes, they bring all kinds of things. And now there needs to be a lot more staff to handle all the people who are there. So a lot more service is required. Therefore, all of the 6 groups show up and they serve together on Shabbat. Of course, on Shabbat, another thing that we have is we have a musaf. We have an additional offering, right? We bring offerings that we don't bring on other days because it is Shabbat. We add. And the holidays, the same thing happens. When the holidays, all the orders of the priests show up together to serve because they have to basically have to be able to handle a lot bigger crowds and a lot more offerings. And this was hard work. It took time. It took a lot of organization. So, as I said, because of the number of the priests exceeded the number of daily duties, the lot determined which priest would get to merit to perform the most certain sacred tasks. There are certain jobs that every priest wanted to have because they were the most important parts of the service in the temple. So 24 divisions. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. There you go. So according to Mishnah, again, this is Yoma 2:1 and Tamid, the first pais, or the first lot, this first lottery, determined who would remove the ashes from the altar, because that's the very first act of the new temple day. Think about it. The ashes are left over from the sacrifice at night. At night, the priests would keep the fire going, and they would burn, well, all of the fat and the internal organs that would be burned at night. So if you've seen fat burn in fire, you realize that's going to be quite a flame. So in the darkness, this big, huge flame would shoot out of the temple because all the fat would be burned at that time. And so, but then in the morning, all that's left is ashes. And somebody has to clean it up. So the outgoing group of priests that just finished their duty is leaving, and the new crew is coming in, and they're like, who's going to do the cleanup before we can get ready for the morning offering? And so that was one of the honors that was given to them, and everybody wanted that job because it was the first act of service. And so they cast lots for that, and to certain people it fell, and that's what they got. Now the second pais determined who would slaughter the daily burnt offering, and who would sprinkle the blood, who would clean the menorah, who would perform other preparations. So there's other now aspects of the temple service that will also be giving out as they would cast lots. This is still, these are the duties that everyone wanted to do, because they put you right in the middle of the action. You were really serving Hashem with your own strength, essentially. So the third pais, the third lot that they cast, would choose the priest who would burn incense, the ketoret in a temple. This task was actually considered so holy that no priest could perform it more than once in his lifetime. People felt like this was like the place to be with God. It was considered to be the epitome of being close to God. I mean, short of the high priest going, into the Holy of Holies, this is it. I mean, of course, that happened only once a year, and you had to be the high priest. That's a different story. But Ketoret was really desired by people. There's all kinds of lore in traditional Jewish sources that speak about what happened to people who actually burned the Ketoret before God, who burned those sweet smelling spices, and what that did to them and how they experienced God. So the fourth lot, the fourth pais, selected those who would bring the limbs of the daily offering to the altar. So there'd be people who would be sacrificing, slaughtering, others would be processing, and others would be taking pieces and literally marching them up. And others would have to take those pieces and give them to somebody else. So if the portion went to the priests, then it would go to the priests and would go into their chambers. If the portion went to the worshiper, it would go to the worshiper. Depending on the sacrifice it was, there was all kinds of rules and laws about how those pieces had to be handled. Certain pieces were burned completely, other pieces were saved and shared, and so that really depended on it. So they decided who's going to carry those limbs, and so beside these most honorable tasks, there were countless other duties that were to be done in the temple, but these were the ones that were determined by lot. But these are the ones that everyone wanted to do, and therefore you had to basically cast lots to be the one, to be the person to whom the Lord has chosen really to do these things. So the priests would stand in a circle. They would do this in the chamber of the hewn stone. And one of them would remove his head covering to indicate the starting point of the count. And the overseer, or the officer of the Mimneh, he would call out a random number. He would say 17 or 45 or whatever. and they would start counting around in a circle starting with the guy who took off his hat. They would start counting in a circle, calling out numbers like this. And when they get to the end of the count, that's the person who gets that lot. So, and you can imagine that this was a random thing because the number of priests standing in a circle was never the same, and the guy who took off the hat was never the same guy either. So it was completely a random. There was no way to predict of how this was going to fall if you wanted a particular duty. And so all of this randomness essentially created the idea that the lot that fell on a person is really from the Lord. It really fell to that person because God wanted for it to work out that way. So they would count in a circle like this, assign a duty, next count, next duty, next count. And that's how they did it. So perhaps an unusual way of casting lots, but that's how it was. It was really taken off of the hat is what started off this idea. So interesting process. But again, we learn about this in Mishnah. Now, the chief priests and those who were chosen to handle the daily Tamid offering, they experienced a profound sense of divine favor. You can imagine, like, here you are, you're handling the most holy part of the sacrifice. And if the lot fell to them, they would feel that this is what God wanted them to do. God chose them. And so they felt the responsibility, but they also felt that this was this gift of favor, this grace upon them. They also examined the sacrificial lamb for the sunrise service, because remember, all of this happened still in the dark. We're still talking early in the morning. We're not there yet. Nothing is happening at this point. We're still assigning duties to each other, and the lamb is kept in a special place that is going to be sacrificed, and it has to be examined. It says they examined it by the light of torches. That's what the Mishnah records in Tamid 1:3. And this examination, of course, required an expertise in the laws of blemishes. There's the laws of Mumim that are detailed in Leviticus 22, 17 through 25. So next time you read through the book of Leviticus and say, why in the world are we reading about this? It's because the priests needed to know how to look for these things. Because if the animal is not perfect, it is not going to be fit for sacrifice. It was still dark at that time, and the priest would physically run his hands all over the animal. He had to kind of go by feel, see if there's any bumps, see if there's any cuts, see if there's some sort of a defect with the animal. So he kind of almost, people would stand there with lamps and torches, and he would touch the animal and make sure that everything was fine, checking for imperfections. If the sacrifice was not disqualified, then it was accepted for the altar. And so it's still pretty early in the morning, 5:30 a.m. or so. Now the worshipers at this point would go in to immerse in their mikvot. If people are coming to the temple early and they want to be there for the early morning sacrifice, that means around 5:30 they will be making their ways through the valley, and they will be walking up to the temple, and there would be all these mikvot. There would be these immersion pools. They would go in and immerse themselves and cleanse themselves before they enter the actual precincts of the temple. People would do that. And as they do that, as they cleanse themselves, the priests would also go through a very similar preparation that involved a very elaborate ritual of washings. At the temple, they would do their washings right there. The bronze laver, which was positioned between the altar and the sanctuary, you've seen that in the video, it contained this water that has been sanctified for ritual use. It was delivered. One of the jobs of the priest, by the way, was to carry water. Believe it or not, that was a job. You had to fill it up because you cannot use it unless you filled it up. There's no pipes, pushing that in. And so you had to bring water in order to use that water. So as I said, there's a lot of jobs in the temple. And for these ritual washings, the people would use the bronze laver, and the priests would purify themselves also, and they would put on their white robes. The priests wore very specific robes, just very plain white robes, but they were the only ones who wore white robes in the temple. Everybody else came in their regular clothing, but the priests were always dressed completely in white. They would have turbans on their heads, and Levites did not get to wear white turbans. The Levites did not get to wear special clothing at all. They actually wore their everyday clothing, but the priests got dressed in special robes. And of course, the high priest, he got to wear very special garments. We read about them in the Torah. And in Antiquities, Josephus tells us that the priest was adorned with gold and blue and purple and scarlet thread after the same manner as the curtain of the tabernacle. So when we read the colors that were used, and these were very, very expensive dyes that were used to make the Mishkan in the Torah, the same exact colors were used to make the priestly clothing. Like he had to fit in. He was part of the package. In fact, the clothing stayed there. He got to change into it, serve, and then he got to change out of it when he was finished. And they were precious stones, and you could read about it in the Torah. So, of course, the high priest gets to preside over all the services, and he gets to wear this very special clothing. And then the regular priests would purify themselves. There were mikvahot for the priests. There was a chamber for the priests where he could go, and there were actually pools of immersion where people, if they needed to do a full immersion, they did that as well in the temple. And so all of this happens in the morning as people are just starting to make their way to the Temple Mount. Now, after the priestly lottery, some people kept watch for the sunrise. Mishnah tells us, the overseer said to them, "Go out and see if there's a time of the slaughtering has arrived." If it had arrived, the one who saw it would say, "Daylight." That's what the Mishnah tells us. And once they say daylight, that's the sign for the people, go open the gates. It's time to let the people in because we're getting closer to the moment of sacrifice. So this is when all the gates of the temple would open. Josephus explained, when the morning sacrifice was offered, they opened the gates of the temple. So prior to that, the gates were closed. Now, the plaza was opened. There were archways that led into it, but the actual building itself of the temple, the gates, were heavy metal doors that took multiple people to actually move. Those gates were closed when the sacrifices were not happening. So they were closed at night and opened in the morning, essentially. During the light hours of the day they were open. They would be open at night only during the celebration, only during certain celebrations. You've seen in the video that I showed you that the court of the women had these really tall erections with ladders that led up to it. Those were lampstands. What they were is the priests would go up this tall monument-looking structure, and they would climb to the very top of it. At the top of it was a bowl that was filled with oil, think of it like a massive oil lamp. And they would take old priestly clothing that would deteriorate. When the white tunic that the priest wears basically gets to the point where he can't wear it anymore and you're not supposed to patch it, they would take those and twist them into essentially massive wicks, and they would use them to burn oil at the top of those large lamps, essentially, that they erected in the temple. So what were those lamps needed for? They were needed for the festivals that were conducted at night. For example, during the Sukkot celebration, at night, when the night falls, when there would be a ceremony of the water drawing, people would light those lamps, and they would light up the entire Jerusalem and the entire temple. Remember, there's no street lights, there's no electricity. You gotta have something. So people would come with torches, and they would have those huge lamps lighting up the temple. And the temple sits at the very, very top of the hill, and the city is kind of built around it. So literally anywhere you look at, the high point of the city would be that elevation, and you would see those torches, those big, huge lights burning, essentially. So everything in the temple was usually done during the daytime, but there were a few ceremonies that were conducted at night, and that's what those essentially items were needed for. The huge lamps were for the few times that the nighttime people would gather, and they literally needed to see. And that's why they were that large. But during the day is when people showed up to the temple, and the services were, even though the burning of the sacrifices continued by the priests at night, the people were just not there to watch, and the gates were shut. 6 a.m. So we're still early in the morning. By the way, remember this is the day in the life of a priest, right? Entering through the gates. Now people are coming through because it's daylight. The gates were open. People are going through these massive gates that are made from Corinthian bronze, which Josephus says were more precious than silver and gold. Worshippers would find themselves now in the court of the nations. They would get through these doorways, these entryways, and then they would proceed further through those gates. The Mishnah says once they enter the territory of the temple, they may not sell there, nor buy there, nor learn there, nor teach there. If you wanted to learn, you didn't learn inside the temple, you learned right outside the temple. In those big massive steps, those of you who've been to Jerusalem know the triple gate and the big massive steps. They're called the steps of the rabbis for a reason, because the rabbis would literally sit on those steps and teach right outside of the temple gates. But that was the rules. So many people would have already purchased their offerings. They would have already exchanged their coins just outside of the temple complex. So like you could see the little stalls right there. You see the ramp? And under the ramp, all these little shops. It's like a little marketplaces that are set up. So you go over there, you purchase, then you go up the ramp, you bring it in. So outside actually had organized marketplace. It was almost like a mall with walking streets and shops to the right and shops to the left that sold all kinds of things that people needed to bring to the temple. So hopefully people would already get everything purchased, exchange their coins, and come ready, and they would proceed to the temple complex beyond the fenced enclosure, and they would walk up the steps into the women's court. There were steps that led up, because even the temple building itself was slightly elevated from the main plaza. So people would walk up the steps and they would walk into the women's court. And that's just 6 a.m. in the morning. And what would happen next? At around 6:30 or so, the priests who ascended would have ascended a high wall. There was a special elevation in the temple. They would blast silver hatzotzrot, the trumpets, which would echo across the entire Temple Mount. And that would signal the beginning of the morning Tamid service. So in case you were late, you had an alarm clock going off telling you, it's time to pray, it's time to pray, the service is beginning. Whether you made it or not to the top of the Temple Mount, where you were, you heard those trumpets, you knew it started. It started, the sacrifices started. So these instruments, they're described in the book of Numbers and Torah. It says they were 2 trumpets beaten of silver. So they were completely made out of silver. And according to Josephus, these trumpets were straight. They were a little less than a cubit long. So not super long trumpets. And so an average worshiper standing in the court of the women or the court of Israel, this is what they would hear. They would hear those trumpets. And that was probably the most exciting moment. That's when everything kind of was charged with this electricity. You were there. That's the moment the sacrifice begins. Guys, everything is ready. Remember, the jobs were assigned. The lamb was picked. Everybody knows what they're doing. The doors are open. People are pouring in. All the preparations have been made. The priests announce it. The altar is already ready. And then comes the sacrifice. So at that point, those to whom came the job to take care of the morning lamb would obviously have to do that. So for male worshipers who were bringing offerings, this was a very dramatic moment, because they get to come into what we call the court of Israel, Ezrat Israel. They would observe the priests performing sacrificial rituals. Basically, it was a court that was divided. One side of the court is where only the priests work, and the other side of the court that was designed to accommodate people who brought their sacrifices. So there was no separate court, there was no division, there were just 2 sides of the same area. But people who brought sacrifices, they could stand there and they can watch. And so the Mishnah provides us some very specific details about what that ritual might have looked like. It says that the altar was 32 cubits by 32 cubits. So it's a square altar, and it was a big elevation. It's an impressive stone structure, approximately 48 feet square and 15 feet high. So that's how big the sacrificial altar was. And it was done with a ramp. There were no stairs. Occasionally you will see the drawings of the altar with stairs. And I have to tell you something. When archaeologists look for temples, they know a Jewish temple right away. There are no stairs that lead up the altar. Never. It's always a ramp. No stairs. And so this one was a gradual ramp that the priests would ascend, 48 feet wide, 15 feet high. And people could stand there and they can observe the priests go up that ramp and bring sacrifices. And so I can imagine that's probably was one of the most intense moments for a worshiper who would probably wait for a long time to make that trip to Jerusalem. This was a big deal. Maybe you weren't from that area. You didn't get to come in there all the time. And so people would come from far and actually witness the sacrifices right there, standing in the court of Israelites. Once you start thinking about it in scale, it's a pretty impressive structure. So the sight of blood that would be sprinkled in the corners, of course, the smoke rising, the thick columns towards heaven, all of this as priests moved together in this choreographed precision, it probably created a spectacle for people that engaged every single sense. I'm trying to imagine what it was like to be there. So it's still early in the morning and all the smoke, and you smell maybe a little bit of incense, because at that point, in a few minutes, the priests would go into the holy place and they would be burning incense there. You could smell all of that, and you can hear that. The temple was a fairly quiet place because the priests worked in silence. They did not talk to each other, did not yell and scream out commands. Hey, Moshe, bring this over here. Like, no, they did their jobs. They knew what they were supposed to do, and they were doing it. There was nobody screaming or yelling or calling anybody or telling them what to do. It was all a very coordinated, choreographed event. People practiced a lot. So people would start burning the meat and the frankincense, the sweet savor to the Lord. Basically, when we read about it, that's what it would be. It would be the smell of the meat burning with spices and oils, and of course then come the mincha offering. So there's all kinds of fruits and vegetables being offered as well, grain, flour, oil, there's libations. All of that created quite a flavor over there. So some people, I can imagine, they prayed and they waited for this long time. This was a big deal. Some people might have come from very far away to experience this sight. And to get into the court of the Israelites to bring the sacrifice, that's what we have to do. Sometimes you'd have to get up early in the morning to be there. And you might have to wait your turn because there's other people out there too. So forget about doing it on a holiday, because it's like going to Costco on a weekend or something. It's terrible. It's impossible, all these people. So we're still early in the morning, 7 a.m. The privilege of offering the incense in the holy place came only once in a priest's lifetime. I mentioned that. The Mishnah states, they said to him, be careful that you do not begin to burn the incense until you go out to the sanctuary. So the priests would basically start burning once they enter through the doors. But those doors are massive, and when they open it, that smoke of the incense is going to bill out of there. So this morning basically reflected how people were deadly serious about this and approaching God's immediate presence, because as far as people felt, they were walking into the room that was called the holy place for a reason. Inside the holy place, it was illuminated only by the golden menorah. There are no windows there. And the priests experienced this dawning proximity to the divine presence. Imagine this. The incense was a mixture of 11 different spices, including frankincense and different herbs. And this burning of this incense created clouds of fragrant smoke that just filled the entire chamber. And many priests, they reported experiencing visions and profound spiritual encounters during these moments of closeness with God. Remember Zacharias in his vision? And speaking with angels and communing with God, this is not unusual at all. All of that happens a lot of times in the holy place. Samuel, remember his conversations? That happens in the holy place where the incense is burned. And when it burned and there's this clouds of smoke, at that moment, somehow God starts speaking to them. And that's why people really desired this job of being there and wanting to burn the incense, because it gave them a chance to encounter God in a very unique way that they may only get to encounter him only once like that in their entire lifetime. And that's being a priest. Because guess what? If you're not a priest, you're not going inside that building at all. It's for the priests only. The high priest and the regular priest. And only if the lot fell to you. That's it. So this is a big honor. This is a big deal. So that's still 7 in the morning. We're still in that day. You can imagine that after the Tamid was brought, there were other services that followed. There were other sacrifices, because the Tamid is the daily standing offering that would be offered twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, right? And during that time, certain prayers would also be recited. Like today, we do the same thing. We recite the Shema in the morning, we recite the Shema at night. Why? Because of the Tamid. The same thing with the Amidah. And so in the middle of the afternoon, there was a special service called Mincha, and corresponds to our Mincha services, that we don't recite the Shema. Why? Because it was not one of the Tamid offerings. This is when people brought a lot of their fruits, their gifts. Mincha literally means a gift, an offering. Like people would bring all sorts of offerings, and they would be brought before God. It could be oil, it could be grain, it could be all sorts of things, not necessarily even animals. It could be small animals as well too. So you have the firstborn and things like that. So the temple, once we got past the Tamid, once we got past the Olah, and that's only 7 o'clock in the morning, there's a whole list of offerings. There are people who are going to bring a purification offering because they just had a baby, right? We read in the Gospels that, okay, Yeshua's mother came to offer a purification offering. Why? Because it was a month after she gave birth. So she came, she offered a purification offering, she offered turtle doves, and that's what it was. Why turtle doves? Because they didn't have a lot of money. So the system of offerings was designed to allow people of means, whatever means they had, to give something to Hashem. So if a person could afford a lamb, they gave a lamb. Now, a lamb cost an equivalent of a day's wages. So what would it take a person to, what does a person make per day? That would be about a price of a lamb. So, and some people just don't have that kind of money to spend. So you could do doves or small animals like that, but a proper yearling lamb, that's about what it would cost, a day's wages. So at 7 o'clock, that stopped and other offerings continued. And until the afternoon mincha, which would be all kinds of offerings that we brought at that time. And then came the time of the evening Tamid sacrifice again. And that would be that second lamb that would be brought. Remember, those are communal offerings. Those 2 lambs that we brought would be communal offerings. On Shabbat, there's also Musaf offering. But besides the communal offerings, there's personal offerings. And then the important people sometimes would send money and to have, say, bring an offering for me. They may not even show up to the temple. But I told you, like last time I was teaching, an emperor might just send money and just say, every day, bring a lamb for me. I'm just going to pay for this. So in my name, do this. Burn this before God and say a few prayers. And so Jews would come to the emperor and says, every day we bring sacrifices in your name, on your behalf, and we pray for your well-being, for success, for whatever God that has upon your life is supposed to happen to you, may it be so. Kind of an idea. Your will be done. And so all these sacrifices would be brought throughout the day. And then in the evening, as the Tamid would be finished, the sun is setting, right? That's when the doors would shut. And the priests would go, and they would wrap everything up, clean everything up, whatever they needed to do. And of course, at that point is when the next order or the next group would be coming in, getting ready. They won't take over until morning. Again, at 4 or 5 in the morning is when they'll start drawing lots. But they're already there because they're already on site, they're already living in that area, and they're preparing themselves to be the next group of people who steps in to serve in the temple. So you can imagine this was a very organized system. And this is just what the priests did. Now, what the Levites did is a whole different story, because they had their jobs that were very different. But hopefully this makes sense for you guys. Questions, thoughts, ideas, feedback? I know I've been talking forever.
Aside from the lesson online here, where can I get that video and see the sign or show it to you?
My YouTube.
Okay.
Just go to my YouTube, and there will be one of the videos on there. It's yeah. I put it like there, so people can kind of stream it and watch it. Okay.
So you mentioned this was the community offering.
Yes.
What happened? When was the personal offering?
So after the Tamid was offered, this was the communal offering. That's when the personal offerings came. So first,
So that's in the evening?
no, right after. Like the first thing we do is offering for all of us as a people. And this is an obligation. An obligatory offering is 1 lamb in the morning, 1 lamb in the evening. So once that 1 lamb was done, then come other offerings. That's when the personal offerings, if a person wants to bring a sin offering, a guilt offering, a thanksgiving offering, it would all follow that a lot. And the priests would take it and they would say, this is when it would happen. Like, you're next, or yours is going to be in the next 3 hours because we have so many people ahead of you or something. The whole entire system, sort of say, is organized, and all depends on who is there and what is being offered on that day. So some were offerings that were, like I said, standing offerings that were predetermined. A lot of wealthy people have just said, I want this offered on my behalf. So the priests knew that they were already going to have this many more offerings that were already designated to be offered that day by somebody else, even if they were not there themselves. But then the individual worshipers who might have traveled from afar, that would have brought their own first fruits, let's put it that way. Let's imagine I'm a fig farmer, and I brought my figs, and I want my figs offered to the Lord. And so they would take a portion of the figs and they would offer them to the Lord, and the rest would go to the priests. Some priests are going to be enjoying my figs for a while, which is great, because that's how the priests were supported. They didn't have other jobs. They needed to eat, and they ate from the offerings that people brought. Portion of it went to the Lord, portion of it went to the priest.
So if I were to take an offering, would I wait and watch them
Yes.
deal with my offering?
Yes. So
Nobody just walked in, turned it in, and then...
not normally. That's if you brought an offering, you wanted to see the process through, and they would be told when roughly it would happen. Because again, if there's a lot of people ahead of you, they can say, "Oh, it's going to be 3 o'clock in the afternoon when we get to this."
Well, I asked that because I was aware that there was a holding area for it.
Yes. There was a holding area. Now, if somebody didn't want to stay, they didn't want to stay. Like I said, some people were not even there. You could bring an offering on a person's behalf of them not even being there. So there were areas where all these items were held. These courts right here is where chamber of lepers. You could see the chamber of wood, the chamber of oils. Like, this is where items and things were stored. There was one for... There were different storage rooms, essentially, if you want to think about it, where items were held as they were getting ready to bring them. Yeah, so it was a flexible system. Lloyd, you had one?
So when someone, did you have to schedule something like when Paul did the Nazarene vow,
Uh-huh.
and he's paying for 3 other guys? Do they do it all at once, or do they say, you just stand in line with all that?
So they come in the morning together. They come early. Like I said, they get up early. They show up when the doors open. And they say, we're here to fulfill our Nazirite vow. So they would have to shave their head and all of that. They would have to go through the whole ritual, and a special offering would be brought, a sacrifice would be brought, and they would be released from their vow after that was completed. But they had to wait for the sacrifice to be brought before they could say a special prayer saying, now I'm released from my vow. So I fulfilled my obligation. I fulfilled my promise to the Lord, essentially. So, and they would travel together, purify themselves, be there early in the morning, ready to do everything that they had to do. This was a big deal. You didn't schedule an appointment. It's not like you could call a secretary and put me in for 9 o'clock. You know, it wasn't quite like that. You just had to show up in the morning and be there, and you didn't know who else was going to be there and what else was going to be happening that day, unless you knew it was a holiday. Then you knew that was a bad time because, again, you're going to get, you know, Costco in a weekend. So it just, there are some days where there were fewer people, and there are some days it was just full. And Shabbat was always packed because, again, people are not working. That means they're all coming to the temple if they can because they're living in that area. You had a question? No? Comment? No, I did. I thought I saw your hand go up. Yeah.
Mostly the people had to stay because like you read Leviticus, you know, like it depends what kind of offering it was and who ate what.
Right.
Some of the priests got to eat, some you actually ate, some got burned, some had where the blood went. So generally it was just deliberate, but
Right.
you had a part in the offering.
That's the whole point of worshiping. It's kind of being a part of it. So that was the ideal. That was the system. Yes.
The Korban Olam
Uh-huh.
offerings, where they would place their hand on the animal
Yeah.
so where would this would all be taking place on the altar?
So the korban, no, would not take place in the altar. So do you see those slaughter tables right there in the priestly court?
Yeah, right.
So right next to them would have been poles where the animals are actually tied. The animals were held and restrained. You did not lay an animal on the altar because the altar was already on fire. You didn't start cutting the animal. Like, I know people have these weird pictures because, again, our minds are polluted by art. And it's like, oh, I lay the animal on the altar, I slit its throat, then I start the fire underneath it. Who does that? You ever tried that? It would never work even if you tried it. Like, that is so backwards. No, the fire gets started, the animal gets slaughtered to the side, it's being cut up, processed, the skin is being removed, the internal organs are being removed, then it's being brought to the altar. So, and that's all done to the side. That's why those tables exist. That's why the animal is tied up over there. And actually multiple priests do the slaughter part. One guy does the cutting, other guys do the holding. And it's very important that the animal does not suffer and it has to be done in the right way. But then after that animal bleeds out, somebody has to catch the blood into the bowl. Somebody has to go sprinkle the blood. So again, it's a group activity, and you didn't just lay it on top of the altar and slit the throat and let it bleed out right there as the whole thing is cooking, or then started the fire underneath it. It just, like, I know that that's how they put it in pictures, but that is people drawing pictures who never had to do a sacrifice. And they don't know. They don't know. They're just kind of imagining it. That's what they think it looks like. So.
You know, those Italian and French paintings are wrong.
Yeah. Just like the Lord's Supper, you know, with Leonardo da Vinci, where they all sit on one side of the table because somebody stood up and decided to take a picture, and they all decided to pose. And they're like, all right, guys, all on this side of the table. They weren't even sitting at the table, you know that. They were laying down on the floor. So the whole table chairs business, that was not even there in the first century. I mean, tables and chairs is more of a European thing. Yeah, so yes, Drake, you're absolutely right. The whole Italian thing, not really exactly where the truth meets reality.
There's a funny painting. It's a good painting by Titian, and it has a picture of Abraham, and he's about ready to offer Yitzhak on the altar, and he's got like this Italian butter knife.
Oh yeah,
It looks like an
Italian butter knife. Yeah,
like Italian flatware.
yeah, that's very helpful.
And behind him, it looks like, you know, Tuscany with the big poplars.
Art is art. Art is art. It's subject to interpretation, and people can do all kinds of things, and that's just fantasy, and that's wonderful. But anyway, thank you guys for jumping in on this. You had another question? Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to ask, do you know the average number of visitors on Shabbat versus?
Ooh, I don't know. I'd have to look that up. I'm sure there's a record that tells us what would typically be at that temple and how many. I mean, on the holiday it would be insane. It would be Jerusalem would just swell up to so many visitors. There was not enough place and not enough room in the inn, right? So that's where that comes from. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Great conversation. Sorry you got to ask a few questions, but